Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 669. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone, and today is Labor Day. So we got a good amount of news to get through on today's show, mostly all of it very bad news. But I do have some good news here first. We have a sponsor here at Conflicts of Interest, and that sponsor is the Expat Money Summit 2024, where you could get a complimentary ticket to the event if you just follow through from the link in the show notes page. There is a great lineup of speakers at the event, including Dr. Ron Paul, Tom Woods, and my boss over at the Libertarian Institute, Scott Horton. Myself, Dave DeCamp, and Hervoya Morik will be speaking on a panel about World War III, and so I'm really looking forward to that event. If you want a VIP ticket to the conference, you could just head on over to expatmoneysummit.com, and upon checkout, use the promo code Kyle, because that will save you $100 off, and it helps out the show. Or you could just click through from the links in the show notes page. The Expat Money Summit is put on by Mikhail Thorup, who is the host of the Expat Money Show. I've been a guest on that show. It's fantastic. I really like Mikhail, so I'm very happy to be speaking at his conference. They're going to go over why you may want to move abroad and what the benefits of that would be, and then also how to get it done and how to get it done quickly. Let's say freedom really starts to go away in America and you need to get somewhere else. How do you get a second passport? How do you buy international real estate? Those questions will be answered at this conference. All right, and as always, the show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, reposted on the blog at antiwar.com. YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you could listen to audio podcasts. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone__. One last quick update before we get into the content today, and that is me and my wife are expecting the birth of our first child, probably, most likely, sometime this week. And so one day this week, you're not going to see a show in your feed, and then I'm going to take a week or two, probably 2 full weeks off to, spend time with my family and my new daughter. And so if you want any updates, that the show will be coming back sooner, if for some reason I'll be away just a little bit longer, again, follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_. That's where I'll post any updates. But if not, don't worry, don't unsubscribe. I will return in a couple weeks, and we'll, have plenty of news like always. All right, with that, let's get into the episode. First up here, this one from our friend Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Russia to change nuclear doctrine in response to Western escalations. So the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Sunday that Moscow will change its nuclear doctrine in response to Western escalations related to the war in Ukraine. Ryabkov told the Russian news agency TASS, "As we have repeatedly stated before, the work is in the advanced stage, and the clear intent is to introduce a correction to the nuclear doctrine." Ryabkov said the doctrine would be updated based on the examination and analysis of development of recent conflicts, including, of course, everything connected to our Western adversaries' escalation course in regards to the special military operation. Ryabkov said that it's too early to say when the doctrine will be updated. He said the time frame for its completion is a rather complicated issue, considering that we are talking about the most important aspect of our national security. Russia's nuclear doctrine was last updated in 2020, and it allows for the use of nuclear weapons if Russia faces a nuclear attack or a conventional attack that threatens the existence of the Russian state. And one of the really crazy things is we have people within the West, within Ukraine, who are actually talking about conducting attacks on Russia, ultimately aimed at bringing down the government in the Kremlin. And so, of course, that could certainly be as interpreted as a threat to the Russian state and lead Russia to use nuclear weapons. Ryabkov's comments came amid fighting in Russia's Kursk Oblast, an offensive Ukraine is conducting with U.S. and NATO support. The U.S. is allowing Ukraine to use U.S.-provided armored vehicles, bombs, and missiles inside Russian territory, marking a significant escalation in the proxy war. The U.S. claims that it was not involved in the planning of the Kursk invasion, but an Ukrainian soldier last week said that Western intelligence was crucial for carrying out the cross-border assault, and so obviously the U.S. was involved in the attack, and just, more lies from Washington there about not being involved. I do think this is a major concern. One thing about Russia delaying the announcement of this, maybe they are waiting for the Americans to show some sort of interest, some sort of sign that they want to be involved in negotiations, and then maybe Russia would take a less hawkish nuclear stance if they engage with the Americans on serious talks about arms control. But I mean, even then, we seem like we're a long way away from any sort of productive arms control talks between the U.S. and Russia at this point. It could also be that Russia is maybe delaying until after the U.S. election, feeling like they're going to want a differently worded nuclear doctrine if they're dealing with Trump versus dealing with Harris. This could be smart just based on the personalities of the two different people. And of course, I would think diplomacy would probably be more likely under Trump, though not guaranteed. I mean, he has doubled down and basically said that he does support the war in Ukraine. He just doesn't like how the U.S. has gone about it in some cases, as far as, providing the weapons free of charge to Ukraine. He wants to turn some of that into loans and things like that. But ultimately, he hasn't shown that he's really against the war in Ukraine. And so there's not a whole lot of reason for optimism there. It's just there's absolutely 0% chance of diplomacy under a Harris administration. And so just the fact that Trump isn't as, against talking with governments that they disagree with as Harris is, then you might have some possibility of some diplomacy under Trump. All right, a couple stories on the South China Sea here. U.S. military open to escorting Philippine ships in the South China Sea. So Admiral Samuel Paparo, the head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, said Tuesday that the U.S. was open to consultations with the Philippines on escorting Philippine vessels in the South China Sea, which would put the U.S. in direct confrontation with China. The U.S. has repeatedly vowed that the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippines vessels in the South China Sea, which means the U.S. is pledging to intervene and fight China if a maritime dispute turns hot. Philippines vessels have tense confrontations with the Chinese Coast Guard near disputed reefs in the South China Sea, which sometimes end in collisions. Chinese boats have frequently intercepted Philippines vessels as they were attempting to resupply a grounded warship on the Second Thomas Shoal. Paparo said the U.S. was asked if the U.S. would accompany Philippines vessels resupplying Philippine forces in the South China Sea. He said, according to the Associated Press, certainly within the context of consultations, every option between the two sovereign nations in terms of our mutual defense, escort one vessel to the other, is an entirely reasonable option with our mutual defense treaty among close alliances between the two of us. So he made the comments at a joint news summit with the head of the Philippines military, who expressed more caution about the idea. So the Filipino general said, "The attitude of the armed forces of the Philippines as directed by Philippines law is for us to rely on ourselves. We're going to try all options, all avenues that are available to us in order for us to achieve the mission. In this case, the resupply and rotations of our troops. We will seek other options when we are already constrained from doing it ourselves." And so Dave mentions here that the comments came amid a spike in tensions between China and the Philippines as two incidents near the Sabina Shoal ended in collision, with both sides trading blame. And we actually have a third incident that occurred over the weekend. So Chinese and Philippines vessels collided near the Sabina Shoal in the South China Sea on August 31st, marking at least the third collision between the two coast guards near the disputed reef in recent weeks. Sabina Shoal is about 80 miles west of the Philippines island of Palawan and is claimed by China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Taiwan. As usual, the two sides traded blame for the incident. The Chinese Coast Guard spokesman said the Philippine vessel deliberately collided with the Chinese Coast Guard ship in an unprofessional and dangerous manner. The Philippine side said the Chinese ship intentionally rammed the Philippines vessel 3 times. Tensions have been high near the Sabina Shoal since Manila anchored a ship in the area over claims that China was planning to build a permanent structure on the shoal to assert its claims. So the Philippines Coast Guard said it would not move the vessel despite the harassment and bullying activities and the escalatory action of the Chinese Coast Guard, a statement from the Philippines Coast Guard said. So in response to the collision, the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment to the Philippines in the South China Sea. The State Department said the U.S. affirms that Article 4 of the 1951 U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty extends to the armed attacks on the Philippines Armed Forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including those of its Coast Guard, anywhere in the South China Sea. As tensions in the South China Sea the tensions in the South China Sea and the U.S. commitment to intervene if a maritime dispute turns hot have turned the waters into a potential flashpoint for a war between the U.S. and China. And just one thing to add here, that all of this comes on the heels of a deal that actually de-escalated tensions around the Second Thomas Shoal, another disputed reef in the South China Sea. And immediately after this deal was agreed to, the U.S. sent a whole bunch of military aid to the Manila. And so Beijing and Manila come to a deal, and then the U.S. sends Manila a whole bunch of military aid, and suddenly we're having escalations in a new region of the South China Sea. I kind of smell Washington as being behind this hike in tensions in this region, which does seem almost inexplicable that you would think that Washington would be interested in toning down the tensions in the Indo-Pacific, given that they are fighting a major war in Ukraine and also the support for Israel in the Middle East and a potential war with Iran, the bombing campaign of the Houthis, the potential, war that we would have to fight in Syria and Iraq. I mean, this is a major conflict that we're talking about here. Even the bombing of the Houthis has been major operations for the U.S. military over the past 9 months. And here we're escalating tensions as well in the South China Sea. And this is one of the things I was worried about when it came to a Joe Biden administration, is that you would essentially have a White House where people have set up different fiefdoms. And so there's somebody who's essentially in charge of the Ukraine policy, somebody who's essentially in charge of the Middle East policy, and then somebody who's in charge of the East Asia policy, or I guess the Indo-Pacific policy. And my guess is that those people in Ukraine are mostly Blinken and Sullivan. When it comes to the Middle East, of course, Blinken and Sullivan play a role, but I think the main driver of policy there is Brett McGurk. And when you move to the Indo-Pacific, it's Eli Ratner. And now, in a way, of course, they're all working for the Biden administration, but at the same time, I think they're all most concerned about their own individual projects, right? McGurk is scrambling to get a deal in the Middle East to bring Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords. Who knows what they're thinking in Ukraine other than just escalate all the time. They're constantly pushing for more escalation, longer range strikes inside of Russian territory, more advanced weapons for Ukraine. And again, I guess that's Blinken and Sullivan who are largely behind that. And then the Indo-Pacific, I think you have Eli Ratner, as well as others in the administration that are China hots, that are really driving this policy to constantly be more and more aggressive. And it's creating a real problem because it's an incohesive foreign policy. If you really want to fight a proxy war with Russia and Ukraine, it's highly stupid. It risks a nuclear war, but logistically, the U.S. could probably, to some extent, do that for some period of time. But when we're trying to do that, as well as provide Israel with 50,000 tons of weapons over the past 10 months, almost 11 months now, and also have our major military assets all over the Middle East for a potential war with Iran and the Houthis on behalf of Israel, and then also be ready to fight a war with China over Taiwan or the Philippines claims to the South China Sea or the Senkaku Islands or any of these other regions is just way too much militarism to possibly be able to maintain all at once. And I think the only reason it's happening is because, the head of the Biden administration, the president, is extremely weak and feeble, and particularly mentally, and is allowing all these, little people just to run around and get America into all these wars that they think benefits their policy, and of course is bankrupting America and hurting all the rest of us. All right, next up here, this article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on September 1st. We also reprinted at antiwar.com. Israel, 6 hostages, including 1 American, found dead in Gaza. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the deaths are proof that no deal with Hamas is possible. I write, Israel recovered the bodies of 6 hostages, including 1 American Israeli in Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the hostages were murdered by Hamas, showing the Palestinian group does not want to make a ceasefire deal and prisoner swap. So on Sunday, Tel Aviv reported that 6 hostages were found dead in Gaza. Israel claimed the 6 were murdered by Hamas fighters shortly before Israeli Defense Forces, IDF forces, recovered the bodies. Netanyahu described the killings as horrific, cold-blooded murder, adding, "My God, avenge them." Over 200 Israeli citizens and soldiers were captured by Hamas and returned to Gaza during the raid in southern Israel on October 7th. Hamas has offered to release the captives in exchange for Palestinian detainees held by Israel and a permanent end to the violence in Gaza. In November, Tel Aviv and Hamas agreed to a 1-week pause that saw 100 Israeli hostages released. Since that ceasefire, Israel has attempted to rescue its civilians during military operations that have killed hundreds of innocent Palestinians, as well as some of the Israeli captives. The American is an IDF veteran, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who was taken from the Nova Music Festival. Tel Aviv said the bodies were discovered near Rafah. In a statement on the deaths, Netanyahu claimed the killing of the hostages showed that Hamas does not want a deal. He asserted that Israel had proposed a ceasefire and hostage deal backed by President Joe Biden in late May, but Hamas rejected that offer. However, it's important. So Netanyahu's timeline is this, that Israel made a serious offer in late May. It was backed by the U.S. It was backed by the UN Security Council, and Hamas rejected it. And this is simply untrue. In late May, Joe Biden revealed a hostage deal, and Hamas said they were considering it, and Netanyahu immediately came out and started to say that he would never agree to a permanent ceasefire. And so Hamas asked the U.S. to amend the deal to make it so that the conditions on Israel were more enforceable, because Netanyahu was claiming that he was going to immediately break the deal. Okay, so I think the Hamas position there is somewhat reasonable. Now, eventually a deal gets approved at the UN Security Council in, I believe, early July, and Hamas has said that they will accept that agreement. However, Netanyahu has responded to Hamas accepting that offer by adding new demands to scuttle the deal. Members of Tel Aviv's negotiating team have also blamed Netanyahu for the lack of a deal. A source told Khan, an Israeli outlet, and this is about the stance of the negotiators, Netanyahu's statement is intended to blow up the negotiations. There's no way about it. The prime minister knows that we are in a critical period during which we're working on solutions for the Philadelphia and Nazarene. They're talking about the corridors ahead of the next summit. And so, again, Netanyahu is the one who does not want a deal here. All right, so this is an interesting article, particularly, coming on the heels of the 6 Israeli hostages being killed in Gaza. Israel's main labor union calls to strike calls for strike to pressure Netanyahu on hostage deal. So Israel's largest labor union has called for a general strike that will start Monday to pressure the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reach a hostage and ceasefire deal with Hamas. So the decision to hold a strike came after the Israeli military recovered the bodies of 6 Israeli hostages who were held in Gaza. The head of the union said, "We must reach a deal. A deal is more important than anything else. We are getting body beds instead of a deal." According to Axios, the strike will almost completely shut down the country. Many private sector companies announced they would join the strike, and the Ben Gurion International Airport will shut down at 8 a.m. local time. The news that 6 more Israeli captives were killed in Gaza sparked major protests demanding a deal with Hamas. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum released a statement blaming Netanyahu for their deaths. And this is really interesting that Israeli society responded that way, because the Israeli government's response was, "This is all the proof we need that we can never reach a deal with Hamas." So the forum said, for 11 months, the Israeli government, led by Netanyahu, failed to do what a government is expected to do: return its sons and daughters home. A deal for a return of the abductees has been on the table for 2 months. If we weren't for thwarting of the deal, the excuse and spins, the abductees whose deaths we learned about this morning would probably be alive. Netanyahu has been sabotaging the chances of a deal by demanding Israel control the boundary of the Gaza to Egypt border, known as the Philadelphia Corridor, a condition the Israeli military doesn't think is necessary. During a security cabinet meeting on Sunday night, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant confronted Netanyahu about his demand. He said, "Continuing to pose constraints such as the decision on the Philadelphia Corridor will result in us not meeting the goals of the war. The fact that we are prioritizing the Philadelphia Corridor at all costs of the lives of the hostages is a serious moral disgrace," he said. Netanyahu isn't backing down on the demand and told Gallant, "After the terrible murder of our hostages, such a step will send a dangerous message to the Hamas that they will lead to more and more concessions and will endanger Israel's security." A few days before the hostages' bodies were discovered, the Israeli Security Cabinet voted to back Netanyahu's demand to maintain control of the Philadelphia Corridor. At a meeting on Sunday, Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer said that it would be a grave mistake to alter that decision. So now let's talk about the situation for the 2.3 million Palestinians living in Gaza. Israel kills 47 more Palestinians in Gaza. Recorded death toll passes 40,700. So this Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, September 1st. Gaza's health ministry said Sunday that Israeli forces killed 47 Palestinians in Gaza over the previous 24 hours, bringing the death toll to 40,738. Israeli forces killed 47 people and injured 94 others in 3 massacres of families in the last 24 hours, the ministry said. According to the Turkish media outlet Anadolu Agency, many people are still trapped under the rubble and on the roads as rescuers are unable to reach them. One of the strikes targeted a school in Gaza City that was sheltering displaced civilians. According to AFP, Gaza's health officials said the strike targeted policemen and killed a total of 11 people. Also on Sunday, an effort to vaccinate children for polio began in central Gaza. The drive will last 3 days in central Gaza before moving to the north and then to the south. The World Health Organization said Israel has agreed to pause military operations in those areas while the vaccines are being administered. But Israeli strikes were reported in central Gaza on Sunday, including one on a vehicle that killed 4 people. Nearly 11 months into Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, there's no end end in sight to the violence. The U.S. continues to supply Israel with weapons for the slaughter and has ramped up arms shipments to Israel over the past month. The true death toll is still unclear, since the health ministry numbers don't include the 10,000 people who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. It's also unclear how many Palestinians have died due to indirect causes. A letter written by a group of experts published by the British medical journal The Lancet estimated that the total number of deaths in Gaza, including those killed by the Israeli military and indirect causes, could reach 186,000. They reached that number by using the death toll from the end of June, which was 37,396. A group of American doctors and nurses who volunteered in Gaza wrote a letter to President Biden last month, and they estimated that the actual death toll already exceeds 92,000, or 4.2% of the population of Gaza. An absolutely horrific and sickening number. All right, next up here, we have an article from Brett Wilkins, and it was originally at Common Dreams, reprinted at antiwar.com. UK continues use of anti-terrorism law to arrest Palestinian defenders. So at least a dozen police officers raided the home of a British pro-Palestinian activist and journalist Sarah Wilkinson on Thursday over content she posted online that allegedly ran foul of the UK's anti-terrorism law. So her son, Jack Wilkinson, said on social media, the police came to her house just before 7:30 a.m. There were 12 of them in total, some of them in plain clothes from the counterterrorism police. Her house is being raided and they have seized her electronic devices. Police, who later freed Wilkinson on bail, did not disclose what content she posted that led to her arrest. Wilkinson has been a tireless critic of the UK's government support for Israel and has posted many images of the death and destruction in Gaza, where Israeli forces have killed and wounded more than 144,000 Palestinians. Israel is on trial for genocide at the International Court of Justice. Pro-Israeli media reported that Wilkinson called the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas-led militants an incredible infiltration, and hailed the late Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated last month in Iran, as a hero. So Section 12 of the UK's Terrorism Act of 2000 criminalizes anyone who invites support for a prescribed organization or expresses an opinion or belief that is supportive of such a group. Violators can be punished with up to 14 years of imprisonment and a fine. Hamas is included on the list of the UK's government list of prescribed groups. Critics say the UK's government uses the highly controversial anti-terrorism law to silence defense. Israel-based British journalist Thomas Cook said in a blog on Friday that Wilkinson's arrest is definitive proof that the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, authoritarian purge of the Labour left are being rolled out against critics on a nationwide basis. The British Prime Minister is determined to terrorize into silence critics, highlighting his and now his government's complicity with the Israeli and its genocide in Gaza. So musician and staunch Israel critic Roger Waters, who co-founded the rock band Pink Floyd, said in a video published on Thursday on social media that Wilkinson was arrested for standing up for human rights and a campaign against genocide. If you allow this to stand, the arrest of Sarah Wilkinson and the persecution of my friend Craig Murray, among others, then you have absolutely accepted that England is now a fascist state. Waters asserted, adding that 1984 has arrived and it's alive and well in the United Kingdom. In addition to her pro-Palestinian activism, Wilkinson is a news contributor for the Lebanon-based news site MENA Uncensored. And the outlet said on social media, the pro-genocide UK regime has arrested MENA Uncensored roving reporter and human rights activist Sarah Wilkinson for supporting Palestinian resistance and relaying what is a reality of what is happening in Gaza and the West Bank to the world. Wilkinson's arrest came 1 week after the Syrian British independent journalist Richard Medhurst was apprehended at London's Heathrow airport and held for nearly 24 hours for allegedly violating Section 12 with social media posts for expressing an opinion or belief that is supportive of prescribed organizations. So on the Wilkinson remarks, I do think these are, not all that provocative or bad. So calling what Hamas did on October 7th, particularly on October 7th, an incredible infiltration is, incredible isn't probably the best adjective to use to describe something when it comes to war, just because people view it as, you're saying it's a positive, but you're really just saying that it's something nearly unbelievable. This isn't something that anybody thought could happen or would happen. After all, Hamas fighters beat some of the most advanced air defense systems in the world with hang gliders. I mean, just, nobody was prepared for what Hamas did on October 7th. And so in that sense, it was an incredible infiltration of southern Israel. Now, you should probably acknowledge that horrific crimes were committed now on October 7th. Maybe during the attack, it's unclear of what crimes have been committed and by who. And so to instantly say that, oh, Hamas is committing crimes in Gaza, I guess you don't have to do that. But now we probably should acknowledge that, maybe the infiltration, the military operations were incredible, that, they also left innocent people dead, and some of them at the hands of Hamas. Certainly some, if not most, of the innocent civilians killed were killed at the hands of Hamas. Now, Israel is also responsible for killing innocents and their own civilians on October 7th. And calling Hania a hero, I don't think is all that bad. Obviously, he is a member of Hamas. He is the group's political head who lived in Qatar. He was the man who was heading the negotiations between Hamas and Israel. And so, praising a diplomat really isn't that big of a deal. And so the fact that she's arrested on this is very concerning and raises a lot of red flags. All right, everybody, that's where, one more story today. 7 U.S. troops injured in raid against ISIS in Iraq. So 7 U.S. troops were injured in a raid against a suspected ISIS hideout in western Iraq on August 29th, the Associated Press reported on Saturday. A Pentagon official said 5 U.S. troops were wounded in the raid and the other 2 were hurt from falls during the operation. The official said that all the personnel are in stable condition. U.S. Central Command said in a press release that 15 ISIS operatives were killed in the raid, which was conducted with Iraqi forces, and claimed that no civilians were harmed. CENTCOM said the ISIS fighters were armed with numerous weapons, grenades, and explosive suicide belts. An Iraqi military statement said the raid on the hideout was targeted by airstrikes, which was followed by an airborne operation. It said the hideout's weapons and logistics support were destroyed, explosive belts were safely detonated, and important documents, identification papers, and communication devices were seized. So earlier this year, Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani called for an end to the U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition in Iraq and said Iraqi forces could have handled ISIS remnants on their own. Al-Sudani reiterated his view on Sunday in a meeting with Major General Kevin C. Leahy, commander of the U.S.-led coalition. He said the remnants of ISIS no longer pose a credible threat to the Iraqi state, as they have become isolated groups in hiding in remote areas to avoid capture. The U.S. and Iraq entered talks on the future of the U.S. military presence, but the Biden administration has made clear it has no intention of leaving. Al-Sudani called for an end to the coalition in response to the U.S. strikes that target the Popular Mobilization Forces, an umbrella group of Shia militias that was formed in 2014 to fight ISIS as a part of Iraqi security force. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for a day. I'll be back with more shows later in the week, assuming my wife doesn't go into labor. Thank you all so much.